The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
It's better than indoor plumbing. It's better than electricity. It's better than the thermos bottle. That's right. It's the 2017 Matt Talk Online Digital Fan Guide Division I Preview, simply calling it The Guide. Over 200 pages digitally delivered to you March 14th. Pre-sale. Pre-orders available now, matttalkonline.com/fanguide17. Listening to this show, you will get $5 off if you use the offer code PODCAST. That's PODCAST. Offer code when you buy it at matttalkonline.com/fanguide17. Over 200 pages of facts, stats, history. Every single wrestler competing in St. Louis, every single score all season long. History, 4-time All-Americans, 3-time national champions. Who's got the most All-Americans all time? Which coach has the most titles? How do they rank top 10? Everything in this guide, digitally delivered, optimized for your tablet and iPad, but it works just fine on your computer. And if you feel like going to Kinko's, you can print it out. It's going to be a lot of paper. But anyway, retailing at $19.99. You listen to this show, and any show on the Matt Talk Podcast Network with regularity, use the promo code, I'm going to say it really lightly now, podcast. Yep, use podcast. That way I know you're listening. You'll save $5. It is worth it. ESPN loves it. You've heard my sound bites on other shows about how much Adam Amin used this thing when he was the ESPN. I'm going to stop belaboring the point right now, and we'll get to our show. But matttalkonline.com/fanguide17, the guide. This thing, the most unbelievable Division I preview guide ever assembled, and it just keeps getting better every year. You'll want it for your fantasy contests. You'll want it for your knowledge bombs. You'll want it sitting there in the arena going, okay, hey, who's this guy? Boom, there he goes. Also got tweet your direct social media stuff right to it. It's an interactive guide. You'll be able to pop up a podcast that's related to who's going on and what's going on. You'll want to get this. matttalkonline.com/fanguide17, promo code podcast. Save yourself $5. You will not regret it.
You've always got time for Short Time.
Hey, it's Mario Lopez.
David Taylor.
Fred Metcalf. Johnny Hendricks. Tony Ramos. Bubba J.
Mike Golick.
Matthew Modine. The one and only Chael Sonnen. And you are listening to the one and only Short Time Wrestling Podcast by the often imitated and never duplicated Jason Bryant.
Now up on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, we head to the Lone Star State. The stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. Jim Giunta, the founder and executive director of the National Collegiate Wrestling Association, which this year will celebrate its 20th anniversary, its 20th annual championships, March 9th and 10th at the Allen Event Center in Allen, Texas. Been a little while since we had you on the show. Jim, how's things treating you down in Texas?
Man, it couldn't be better. Better not deserve, that's for sure.
I'm sure the weather's better than you deserve, because I see all these great trips you guys take all the time. You like the warm tropical weather, and I guess Texas is just like that's as cold as you want to get.
That really is. It's beautiful down here, and this time of year, our highs are in the low 70s, and wake up in the morning about 60 and get to take a run, and it's nice. It's great.
Well, I guess, your career spent wrestling in Pennsylvania. You're kind of getting away from the cold weather as you've sit there and settled as an adult, so to speak.
Amen. Yeah, that running in the snow up in PA was a little rough, but I was young enough to handle it then. Now I want to be a little cushier in my old age.
We got a lot to talk about on this episode. One, it's 20 years. This is 20 years since you sat down and put pen to paper and said, you know what, we're going to do something different here. Let's just go back in time and the formulation of the NCWA, the National Collegiate Wrestling Association, which for those who are unaware, it's not just club teams. There are varsity programs. And again, there's another trigger word when we're talking about this is the word varsity. We'll get that in a bit, but there are sponsored, full-fledged, athletically supported teams within the NCWA. There are club teams. There are junior colleges. An interesting mix here. But when we go back to day zero and when you got the idea to start this thing, what was really the genesis of this project and what were your long-term goals?
Well, I mean, the process was that we had just finished pushing wrestling into Texas with the UIL. We had run club programs in Texas for a number of years, and after years, we got the UIL to finally take it over. And at that point, we looked and said, "What's our next step?" And there were no college wrestling programs, not only in Texas, but there was nothing in Louisiana, nothing in Florida, nothing in Alabama. I mean, the South was naked when it came to wrestling programs. And so we said, well, next logical step is let's see if we can get college wrestling in Texas. And, we had some clubs when I was in college way back, and we said, let's start that. Let's formalize it. Let's turn it into something that people can plug into. And a buddy of mine from Pennsylvania, John Piper, who had been the varsity coach up at Lafayette College, he came together with me, and we we pulled together some Texas teams and some Pennsylvania teams and had our first national championship in 1998.
Yeah, we look back at some of those teams, and some of those schools have maintained a strong club presence. Some of them actually now have varsity programs in terms of NCAA and NAIA status or junior colleges. There's been a growth, and there's been some attrition with clubs, and there's been a boom. When you look at what you started 20 years ago, and you sit there and realize this is going to be the 20th one, what do you think has been the biggest thing the NCWA has done for the wrestling landscape in this country?
Well, the truth is, I think what we've done, and inadvertently, I mean, we've created an association that's now recognized by, the NCAA, by the National Wrestling Coaches Association. So we're now a governing body, just like the NAI, which we frankly never intended to be. We thought we would extinguish ourselves over the years and move all the programs to NCAA. That didn't happen, and I've learned over the years that it really is impossible through the NCAA. They have rules, and certain schools could not get into those. But, I guess the biggest contribution the coaches have made in our association is we've put lots of guys on the mat, and gals now too, that never would have wrestled in college if it hadn't been for the NCWA and the volunteer coaches and everybody around the country that does this. I mean, I'm the spokes guy, but we have conferences and chairmen and commissioners, and we have all kinds of folks volunteering their time to build this. And so over that time period, we've had just about 35,000 alumni. So 35,000 wrestlers have come through the NCWA over the last 20 years. And today they're teachers, they're coaches. The tradition of wrestling has helped to been carried on through these guys and gals because, let's face it, we all love wrestling, but if you talk to most people, when they go out and they have little kids, they go out in the backyard. Everybody, whether they played football or not, will throw a football with their kid. Everybody will play basketball, and baseball. But unless you wrestle, the odds are you're not going to get out in the backyard and show a double leg takedown. And so wrestling grows through legacy, through tradition, through families. And if we lose the colleges that produce our teachers, that ultimately produce our coaches, our sport's doomed. And so what this has done is produce 35,000 people that are potentially going to be parents of kids that are going to teach them how to wrestle, or coaches and teachers. So I would say that's probably the biggest effect of the folks that are committed to keeping NCWA alive and growing.
For people who are unfamiliar with the process of getting a program started, a lot of times you'll see it's a well-organized group of students. Sometimes it's a faculty member. I mean, what types of situations do you see approaching you year in, year out to say, hey, we've got kids here that want to wrestle. How do we get involved?
Sometimes it is a coach that'll be contacted by a student, but in most cases, it really is a student at a school who's passionate about wanting to get things started, and then we coach that athlete in how to get a program started at their school as a sport club. Traditionally, we try to find them a coach, and of course now, in the old days, NCWA teams were primarily student-run, student-coached. Today, the vast majority have 1, 2, even 3 coaches. Most of those coaches have a stipend. A few of the coaches are full-time paid coaches in the NCWA. But the evolution continues to move in that direction. But it typically starts with a student who comes out of high school, goes to a college where they have no opportunity to wrestle, and then someone tells them, hey, do you know anything about this NCWA thing? And we get a phone call saying, hey, I'm at XYZ school, and I don't know what to do, but I heard I can start a club. And that's kind of where it starts. And then we coach the student how to go through the process with the administration at the university, try to help them find a coach, and then they get a budget from the university, and we move forward.
When you look at all the teams, and again, there's teams that come and go within this organization, but what are you most impressed with about, say, that first student-run club that's just been sitting there consistently, been a part of this organization for 15, 20 years?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've had you have the ups and downs with those. There's no question. We got to a plateau for a while at about 100 teams, 105. And then we were bringing teams in and we were losing teams. And a lot of that was a result of not having non-student coaches or adult leadership. Because when that kid who was running the program and was all fired up, when he graduated or whatever, found a girlfriend, I mean, the program could collapse. So today in our rules, they must have a non-student coach. And that has helped us continue to build. That's just been in the last 4 years. So we've gone from that 105 lock-in to right just above 200 teams right now, including about 35 women's teams. And those are growing. Those started off, I think our first women's event, we only had like 21 or 22 gals. This year we'll have over 100 that'll qualify to come to nationals and wrestle here in Allen, Texas.
Yeah, and we'll get to the women's bit in a moment. I know that the WCWA, they've been doing freestyle wrestling. We'll talk about the differences and similarities between the programs there. But when you talk about 200 teams, 200 entries, you had to go from what was essentially kind of more or less an open. Now you've got qualifiers, you've got conferences. I mean, regionals. This is a series, just like you go with Division I, Division II, Division III, the NAI. There's a level of qualifying tournaments that go into this thing, and just kind of explain that process and how that's morphed from a small tournament to something that now there's 200 teams trying to get to one spot at the end of the year.
Yeah, it is pretty big. We now have 9 conferences around the country. We have about athletes each year, male athletes, about 2,500 college athletes are qualified. Of course, they have to be doing the academics like the other leagues. I mean, they have to be carrying a 2.0 GPA cumulative. They have to be taking a course load, et cetera, et cetera. But they've got to qualify through those conferences, and depending on the size of the conference, certain conferences get more qualifiers than others. But we whittle that 2,500 down to about 440, 460 with some wild cards. So we currently have the largest collegiate tournament in the country because we have 11 weight classes, and we have about between 40 and 44 per weight class that actually qualify to come to the national championships in the men's division. But it's tough. It's pretty brutal. If they earn All-American here, I really believe they can wrestle just about anywhere. We've had a number of athletes that have moved on, and we encourage this, by the way. We love to see schools that have scholarship opportunities come down and recruit some of our top wrestlers into those schools. And we've had a number of those move on and wrestle at the at the D1 level and D2. We're accomplishing the things we want to accomplish, but the number one thing is get everybody on the mat. I don't care what division it is. If I stick an NCWA guy out there and he's wrestling against an NCAA Division II guy in a tournament, you don't know the difference. All you know is one of those guys won and one of those guys lost. It's a 50-50 toss-up as to whether it would be a D2 guy or an NCWA guy. So we're pretty pleased with where the coaches have brought it.
Yeah, one of the guys that I think a lot of people will mention most recently is Santiago Martinez, who was a multiple-time NCWA champion from Central Florida, had a year of eligibility left, qualified for the D1 championships at Lehigh, so and had some nationally ranked wins. So you see guys like that come out here. Of course, Jordan Spieler, speaking of Central Florida, has been on the Greco ladder, and he's a guy that with J.D. Robbins been working with the Southeast Regional Training Center. So sometimes you get these ringers come in too. Like the Canadians up at Douglas College, for example, Aso Polani and John Pineda have both, especially Pineda, he's been representing Canada on the world teams. And that's one thing that also is pretty interesting is it's the Canadian element. How did Douglas College approach you? Because most of the wrestling in Canada is freestyle. How does Douglas College approach you and say, hey, we want to wrestle this folk style stuff down in the States?
Well, Coach Rose was the guy up there at the time, and they were just, I've never been up there, but they're just apparently just over the border, and they really did not get as much competition during the year as they wanted, and they felt like this was a really good outlet for them to do that. And so they step out of their comfort zone and come into wrestle collegiate style, which is different for them. But well, I'll tell you what, on their feet, they were pretty amazing. I mean, they got on the ground; it was a little rougher for them, but they're pretty tough. We had British Columbia inquired this year, University of British Columbia, and they look like they'll join this coming season. So we may have even some more Canadian teams come on board.
Yeah, because as you're looking at the map, they are in Vancouver, just across the line, right down the road, really, from Simon Fraser, which did spend a little bit of time in the transition period. And that's another thing that the NCWA, and this is one thing that also kind of beefs up the quality of the championships every couple of years when there's a wave of teams reclassifying. I don't like to use the term moving up because neither do the particular institutions, but say reclassifying from an NAIA to a Division II, or in some cases like St. Andrews going from Division II to the NAIA, or moving up from junior college, or Grand Canyon was in that lull when they still had a program. It's like, okay, our school's going D1. You're probably going to have Cal Baptist sitting back in your ranks here soon as that school has announced that it's going from Division II to Division I. So, explain why the opportunity, why you allowed the opportunity for schools that were transitioning to compete.
Well, we get pushback from a lot of our coaches every year on that. We try to keep that. We want to keep that tradition going if at all possible. But our objective again is building overall wrestling. I'm not concerned if they're in the NCWA or if they're in the NAIA, NJCAA. The objective is the more guys we got on the mat, the better it is for wrestling. So we wanted to help those transition teams because coaches were having a difficult time during a 3 or 4 year hiatus in going to their national championships or their postseason. Those coaches were struggling with recruiting and selling guys a dream that maybe, 3 years from now, you have that opportunity if you come to our school. So by giving them a postseason, it allowed them to recruit and work towards that postseason and be able to come out because they do have, most of those had scholarships and the opportunity then to get those kids in and do very, very well with us and come out of there with a number of All-Americans. We've had the teams that have gone to D1s like the Southern Illinois Edwardsville and we've had Notre Dame College that went from NAIA to D2 and won a national title with us, and then they're in D2 the year after. So that's kind of been the tradition, and we're going to keep working on that. Although truthfully, our coaches have gotten to the point where they're not as excited about that situation when you have a D1 program coming through that's got 9.9 scholarships. It's tough to compete with that.
Now, one thing that I'm also curious about, and this kind of goes back to your roots a little bit, as you wrestled at Penn State New Ken for a while, that is the Penn State branch campuses. And some of them are Division II, some of them are Division III, some of them fall under the U.S. Small College Athletic Association, USCAA, which you guys have also had a relationship with. Now, explain how the branch campuses have sprung up and created programs and really used the NCWA as a jumping off point. Penn College of Technology is moving to a Division III program. Penn State Behrend is a Division III school reintroducing wrestling. So, your home state has benefited from this organization.
Well, I'm very thankful for that. I mean, that's a big part of it. Having wrestled at Penn State New Ken, I would have gone up the main campus, but I was going to be behind John Fritz, and John and I have gotten to know each other now well because he until last year was the athletic director over all the Penn State campuses, and he was integral in trying to help us continue to build those programs at Penn State. But you're right, we've had a number of those make moves. That Penn College program, University of Southern Virginia, same thing. We went from here to D3, I believe. And so we've had a lot of success in those Penn State campuses. We keep growing them. I mean, those are relatively small schools, but Pennsylvania is so rich in wrestling tradition and wrestling numbers that each of those schools can succeed and do pretty well.
Yeah, Southern Virginia is another one I was going to bring up. Of course, Penn College transitioning. And in some cases, there are schools that have decided to create a wrestling program and they'd be like, okay, we don't want to put this out there like we're moving a wrestling club up. So they would shutter the club program for a year and be like, okay, we're introducing a new sport. Whereas most people that have half a brain would realize, no, you've basically started this because of the success of the club program and showed it was viable. How do you get us? I mean, how active are you in talking with administrators when there may be an actual real call? Be like, hey, we're looking at really moving our wrestling club to varsity status like Southern Virginia did. I mean, how involved do you get in those type of conversations?
I'm always happy to be involved. The truth is they don't typically call me. I usually talk with the coach, and the coach relays that. I haven't talked to many ADs that have been in that situation, although I really encourage that. But we did have, Belmont Abbey, I think, took a year hiatus like that, and they built a program, took a year off to move it in. That really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, Ferrum College, I'm trying to think Nate's last name, but
yes,
the
sir.
coach there, there you go. Those guys have all called me even before these programs started and say, hey, listen, we're going to go D2 or we're going to go D3 or we're going to go eventually D1, whatever. And hey, that the NCWA be a great launching pad for us. And so we strategize on that up front, knowing that that's generally their objective. Sometimes they reach it. Sometimes they end up just staying with the NCWA. But in most cases, they reach that objective. We even have teams that reclassify from other divisions. Obviously Liberty University went from Division I and they're now with us. Springfield Tech this year chose to wrestle in the NCWA rather than the NJCAA in both their men's and their women's programs. So it just depends on what fits that school the best. We certainly are not trying to move teams from D1 or NJCAA into the NCWA. But you find sometimes that those things can work better for schools, and of course that's their athletic director's call.
What are some of the misconceptions that you've had to shoot down over the years about maybe not in the quality of the competition, but the caliber and the varsity status? Again, there's that varsity word again that keeps popping up. Like the Penn State branch campuses are varsity programs. The apprentice school, I'll get more into them here in a little bit, but they're a trade school. They pay their athletes, so they can't be in the NCAA, but they've got an athletic department. And when you get into situations on eligibility, like what matches count, what matches don't count. That's got to be sometimes a headache for you. And what rumors do you have to dispel in those situations?
Well, the rumor mill is funny. In my generation, it's the old guys, and they're the ones that fight it. When you're dealing with the younger coaches and the younger wrestlers, that doesn't ever seem to be an issue anymore. I mean, anybody wrestling in the NCWA today after 20 years, I mean, none of the high school kids even knew a time when there was not an NCWA. So things have changed. It's going to change even more over time. But yeah, you're right. We still have this, well, that's not varsity wrestling. I go, look, I don't know how you define the word varsity, but if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find that it is a number one team supported by a school, it's high school or college, supported by the school that uses its colors, logos, and name. And so the NCWA programs, other than programs that are at Penn State main campus, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Lehigh, those are all NCWA clubs. And we're very careful to make sure those are defined as clubs because they're on the campus of an NCAA program. But the other programs, whether it's a University of Central Florida, as you mentioned earlier, a Liberty, any of those are considered varsity programs. They may not be athletic department programs, but they are chartered by the university as the number one wrestling program on campus. There is no other one. They are funded by the university. The equipment's purchased by the university. The university allows them to use their name, colors, and logo. That is a varsity program. Whether or not, like I say, the old timers are just trying to figure this thing out. And the beauty of where we are, I would think wrestlers would want to back this, because we are the only division that is 100% supportive and building of wrestling. I mean, it's our number one goal. NCAA D1, as much as I love those guys, NCAA needs football, basketball, and baseball. Wrestling is an afterthought, and D2 is even worse. So we are committed to growing wrestling like no other league in the country. And I think once people begin to understand that how we built this and why we built it, that we end up, I've yet to have somebody at least tell me, now behind closed doors, maybe it's different, but to tell me that, well, that's a stupid idea, we don't need to be doing that. They usually say, wow, I didn't know this existed. Man, that's great. We got more kids wrestling. So once we educate them, most people come around and are excited about what we did.
Yeah, and again, I'm not gonna argue the semantics, because I mean, the way I speak, I usually speak in terms of varsity, but the way you're explaining it, athletic supported, I guess, would be, there's the dividing line between what's the NCWA club team, what's the athletic department's scholarship Penn State program. There's most of it's semantics, but
it is semantics, but we do have to, and you have to adhere to that. We are careful not to step on those toes. And we use many times we use the word athletic. It's an athletic department program. It's a sport club department program, and that's okay. But we still see those as the varsity program on that campus, and certainly try to promote it that way and build it through that process. Because when they get on the mat, I mean, our guys, remember, our teams are able to wrestle against NCAA D1, D2, and D3, and I challenge people all the time. They go, yeah, but it's a club. I go, well, you find me another club, a baseball club, a soccer club, a track club, whatever it is. You find me a club that is allowed to compete against the NCAA counterpart, and I would call that not a club. But as far as I know, there's no other sport that where they can compete against NCAA competition where it's a club. But the NCWA does. So,
yeah, there's a rabbit hole of countable contests and stuff like that too, because there's still the issue of what is technically a countable contest, and we see that with the junior colleges anyway. And that's not just an NCWA issue, but when we talk about countable contests, I want to swing back to the apprentice school, because this is a program that I grew up around. One of my very good friends, Bruce Shoemaker, is the head coach there, and my old roommate Jeff Rusak was the coach there for a while. So I've had an association with this program. Mike Clayton, who's now at USA Wrestling, was a coach there for a while. Keith Morlam, Kevin Darkus, these are names people know. But the apprentice school and their former athletic director, I guess now retired athletic director, Bill Casto, who's been a big part of the USCAA. Did he come and find you guys and be like, hey, we've got a varsity, for lack of a better term, varsity wrestling, an athletic department funded wrestling program, and we need a place to compete for the postseason? How did that discussion go, and how much did the apprentice school really lead to maybe bringing in these branch campuses that were at small schools but weren't NCAA or NAIA or junior college affiliated?
Yeah, I've told Bill Casto for years, and Bill's a good friend, and, he founded the USCAA. And Bill, Bill was integral in, frankly, the overall, the long-term credibility, which ultimately led to the success of the NCWA. I mean, Bill came down when we had our first national championship, and he had heard about it. Don't ask me from where, but he said, is this a legit deal? Is this something that we would be proud to plug into? And we ran our first one, and we always have tried to run a really nice show. And we were at a small school. We were at Richland Junior College. We only had 4 mats. It wasn't, what it is today. We do the whole NCAA D. We don't have the D1 crowds, but we run it like D1. We have the stage at the end. We do the national anthem up on stage with the singer. I mean, it's top shelf. But at the time, it was still good, but it was small. And Bill looked at it and came down and watched the whole thing, and he said, "You know what? I like this. I think this would help our kids. It would help build our program." And he said, "We're gonna be a member next year." So they came in, I believe in 2000.
I'm looking at the Scott Farrell hooked me up with the results before this. So,
good.
1999, the second year at Richland, which actually reintroduced its club program this year. It was the first time the apprentice school made an appearance. So it's been 19 of the 20 years the A school's been in there.
Absolutely. And Richland, by the way, is an athletic department funded program. But you're exactly right. So that alone created a lot of credibility. I mean, they were tough as nails. And then we got Pensacola Christian with the Hazelwinkles come in. So, but Bruce Shoemaker, I don't know. I don't want to get off him too quick because this will be Bruce's last year. What a class act. This guy, was a high school icon from what I understand in coaching up there. And he's been just phenomenal. I mean, not only is he a great coach, but he's a mentor of men and just a really, really top shelf guy. So we're going to hate to lose him. In fact, we ain't going to lose him. I mean, he might retire, but we're going to still get him involved somehow. He doesn't know it yet, but he's not leaving wrestling.
Well, how many retired coaches actually retire from wrestling? I don't know anybody that stays away. It's not like, all right, bag is there. I'm going to see you. I'm going to Turks and Caicos. I'm just going to hang out I'm retired. No, I don't know any coach that's done that.
You're right. They don't. And Bruce isn't going to do it either. So, so he's been just amazing. And we feel blessed to have had him part of the NCWA.
One thing that the NCWA has also been has been a testing ground, a petri dish, if you will, for different rules and such. And one of which was the optional scoring, which you guys tried to introduce a couple years ago. And now with the national duels, your national duels, which you just completed at Liberty University, won by transitioning Emmanuel College, which is transitioning from the NAIA to Division II. They're launching their program during this process. So the NCWA has been their home. But the talk a couple years ago with the NWCA about saying, hey, let's make the national duels add some points to the scoring at the championships at the end of the year. You guys just said, hey, you know what? We'll try it. And you guys have been doing it for the past couple years. How did this process get rolling and how has it worked out for your programs and how did the coaches respond?
Mike Moyer, and I'm not sure exactly if he brought it up, but I know Mike, or if he came up with it, but I know Mike brought it up in a board meeting a number of years back and talked about, that was something they were trying to get the NCAA to do. And, of course, the NWCA, as great a job as they can do, they're not a governing body, so they have to be schmoozing and trying to figure out the game. How do you get all these guys working together? And it's been difficult for them. So, but in there, they came up and said, this is an idea we want to have to bring people through and make duels more important. And I love the idea. And I went up to Mike afterward and said, hey, Mike, is it okay if we do this? I want to step on his toes, but is it okay if we go do that? And so I went into our guys. I said, listen, I think this is a great idea. We need to implement it. We don't have to go through all the rigmarole he does because we're a governing body and we voted on it and bam, we did it. And it's really worked out well. I mean, we've expanded now. We now have the national duels, and this year that was held at Liberty University in Virginia. And we also had the regional duels, and that was out on the West Coast at Dixie State, just outside of in southern Utah, just outside of Vegas. And so we had 16 dual teams out there, and we had 20 dual teams at the national duels, all of which scored points towards the national championships. The long-term objective is going to be to have 4 separate areas around the country that will then feed into one big national duels. And that's a work in progress. And on the other subject, I still love the scoring idea. I'm going to fall on the sword on that. That was 100% my fault. The reason that failed, we did not have the clocks to show team scores. And so people were so confused as to how this team scoring was working. And we may try it again. I don't know if I can, muster up enough votes to try it again, but I really think there's some merit to it, and we'll see what happens.
We mentioned some of the alumni and the ringers that come through. We mentioned John Pineda at Douglas, who, went to compete for Canada. A couple names that jump out at me as I look through this list. One of them, I'm just going to throw it out there. You're not like he's a name. It's just my buddy, Chris Carhan, we call him Coach Seabass back home, placing in those early years. I just want to throw his name out there just because, but then we get, wrestlers who have been at postgrads at Blair Academy. I just recently had Raleigh Peterkin on the show. He competed in the NCWA. We've got the prep school kids from the Army, Navy, and Air Force prep schools now competing. And then I want to circle this guy. You've got a couple MMA guys in there, including Tom Lawler from the University of Central Florida, who really took a lot of good college heavyweights into overtime when he was competing for Central Florida at that 235 weight class. You mentioned the weight class that you had 11. Yeah. Now you got Tom Lawler is a guy who people can look at and be like, oh, where did he wrestle? And they can say, oh, he wrestled the NCWA at Central Florida and won a couple titles. And he's kind of proven his mettle and his worth within the world of mixed martial arts. So, the alumni there, and then the 235, the linebacker division. Let's explain why 235.
Well, before I let you get off of the MMA side, the one of the wrestlers for Grand Valley is in the UFC right now. He's got a title bout coming up this next UFC. Tony Ferguson, and Tony is, and I don't know those weights for those guys, but he's probably 165 or something like that, probably cut to 140. But Tony Ferguson, I guess, just called out. I don't know. I don't know enough about MMA, truthfully, but apparently a bunch of guys in my office know about it. And so look up Tony Ferguson. He's going to be he's a force to be reckoned with, and he was a national champion a number of years back for Grand Valley State. And so we're putting some guys out into the UFC and that MMA field, and I don't want to say too much about this, but we'll probably have our first collegiate MMA national championship in October in Vegas this coming year. So that's one of our additional forays as we build wrestling.
Yeah, I understand there was the grappling league that you were touching on. We'll just leave that for another show as we get closer to it. We can just plant that seed a little bit. Another thing that you guys have done, you have not been afraid to try new things, is a Greco league, and it just various things about keeping your clubs and athletes engaged. I mean, why is the freedom that you guys create with the NCWA so beneficial for everybody that's involved?
Well, I agree with you. You mentioned it right up front. Keeping our athletes involved year-round. From an academic standpoint, it's a good thing. The coaches stay involved. The athletes can pick and choose whether they want to, we want more and more guys on the Greco program. I mean, to build Greco for our international teams, we got to have a lot more kids in there. I believe that quantity ultimately will give us quality. So if we can take the number of people around the country participating in Greco at these higher levels, at the college levels, from about 200 today up to 1,000, you're going to have a lot more to pick from and a lot more competition around the country, which is going to, raise all ships. So, the idea of whether it's MMA, whether it's Greco, whether it's freestyle, or whether it's collegiate, we want to do them all. And the wrestlers are going to find their sweet spot. They're going to find where they're good and what they love, but we got to give them an opportunity to try it all. And so that's what we want to do. We want year-round participation in the NCWA, whether that's grappling or whether that's Greco. So that's kind of our belief system.
Let's go back to the women's thing just for a bit. I understand we've got busy times here in the sport of wrestling, but the battle with getting women's wrestling at some campuses has been because from an NCAA standpoint, it's not listed as an emerging sport. What is the NCWA doing to help the existing structure with the WCWA, which most are NAIA programs? You've got a couple NCAA teams, but all of those clubs, there's key words in the NCAA literature that say establish clubs that count towards, hey, this can be listed as an emerging sport. Is the fact that and first of all, the NCWA women's wrestling, that's folk style, correct?
It is folk style, but I don't think that'll matter to the NCAA. We're hopeful that we can take schools like, Central Florida, Florida State. We've got, if you look on our website, and people ought to go to that ncwa.net and look on that team section, and they can see the women's programs. But you're exactly right. If we can build those programs to size, some of them right now only have 2, 3, 4 gals on them, but some of those programs have 8, 10, 12, 15, as many as 20 girls on them. So, and those are typically crossover WCWA programs. We encourage our girls to wrestle freestyle, and we would hope, and we're seeing more and more of the WCWA programs saying, hey, it doesn't hurt us to do collegiate. In fact, the thought process was that we think we can get more gals on the mat because they learn collegiate style in high school, and then if they're told they got to go freestyle, they're a little intimidated, especially if they got to get on the mat with some of these Olympians that we now have in the U.S. And so bringing them on in the collegiate style that they're used to, and then by the end of that first season, you can start introducing freestyle, and they slide right into it. But if we never get them started, it just doesn't happen. So our philosophy is to get them on the mat, get them some success as a collegiate style, and ultimately the best ones will, just like in the men's area, the best ones will move up to international competition and hopefully Olympic competition. So I think we're on the same page. WCWA is mostly NAIA schools, so what it looks like is in the NAIA they're an emerging program, and it looks likely that very soon those teams will be picked up by the NAIA, which will sort of orphan 5 or 6 teams, and those teams will have a choice of either continuing to try to rebuild the WCWA or joining us, and we'll help them either way. Whatever we can do to make that work, we will.
Jim Giunta, I want you to talk to me about March 9th and 10th. It's a busy weekend for college wrestling, but give me the elevator speech on why people should be paying attention. And if they're in Texas, they're around the great state of Texas at that weekend, they're like, okay, well, there's a lot of options for wrestling to watch on TV. Why should they head down to the Allen Events Center? Why should they check out the streams of this thing? There's going to be wrestling overload that weekend. I mean, it's really the big one. So where's the elevator pitch to say, hey, you need to pay attention to us too?
I just say, number one, there's just that you don't get the same camaraderie, you don't get the same effect, you don't get the same smell on the internet that you get in the gym. And so, coming out, number one, it's live, it's in person. You create and continue to build relationships with other wrestlers. But we put on a great show. The athletes that are there have busted their hump all year long, and they've made it. We're there to really celebrate those that qualified, and more importantly, those that become All-Americans. We have a big banquet at the end. I think we're the only association that does that. We have a 800-plate banquet for the All-Americans and families, and it's a fellowship. It's a different kind of deal, but it's a lot of fun. We also have the evening before we actually get started. We will have I think we're the only ones that do this too, but we have a wrestling combine, and so we'll have about we run about 150 high school juniors and seniors that come in with their parents, and they spend about an hour and a half being drilled and running through situation wrestling, and the college coaches walk around. They're not just NCWA coaches. We have some of the coaches come in from Oklahoma, some of the coaches come in from Arkansas, and then look at these kids, and these are guys that maybe obviously didn't get picked up as a D1 or D2 scholarship guy. And the truth is, out of Texas, there's only a handful that actually get picked up. So the rest of them, we want to get them out there and wrestling. So these coaches, including Bruce Shoemaker and those folks up at Liberty and everywhere else, will be there to walk around, talk to the wrestlers, more importantly, talk to the parents, and what kind of money can they get? Most of them are not going to get athletic scholarships through the NCWA, although we do have some. There's not very many. What they will get, though, is ROTC and Pell Grants and learning how to get in there with some of these academic awards. And the coaches know how to do that and structure a program to help a kid get a great education at a great school and continue to wrestle. You know, schools like MIT, Rensselaer Polytech, Yale. I mean, if you want to be an Ivy Leaguer, you can still wrestle there. If you want to be a Texas A&M, a Georgia, a Cal State, a Notre Dame, those are all part of the NCWA. So, you know, we encourage you to come out and root for those teams. If you're an alumni of some of these programs, God would love to have you in there yelling for your team. So I hope we get them out that weekend, with us or somewhere else.
Jim Giunta, Executive Director of the National Collegiate Wrestling Association. Just all sorts of energy coming from you now. And just as we wrap up here, just we've already asked for the elevator pitch. What's some things you just want people to know about the NCWA that we haven't discussed that you feel is required reading or required listening as we talk about this organization?
Well, I just think that any time they have a chance, that your listeners have a chance to lead a student back into the sport, whether they can do it at a college that already has wrestling or one that doesn't. If you're a high school coach right now, we need your help to keep these kids going. I know some parts of the country, coaches are always talking to their guys about how to go to college, or their gals, how to go to college. But I know there's also lots of other coaches that say, you know, my kids aren't good enough to really go to college. And so that conversation doesn't come up a lot. And I'm imploring that you have the conversation, even with your athletes that are, you know, mediocre, that you say, this guy didn't even get out of sections or regions or districts or whatever it is you have there, why he's not going to have any chance in college. Well, you know what? A lot of these guys mature later, but the critical thing is to keep them on the mat so that someday they become a parent who then teaches their kid. They become a coach who ends up spinning off hundreds or thousands of kids over their lifetime. But if we don't get them to go to college and wrestle in college, the guys that wrestle in college are 6 times more likely to then become a coach or to then get their kids involved in wrestling when they have children. And that's really our mission. So I would ask you as a coach, and you as parents that are hearing this, don't let any kid who still has a desire to wrestle, don't crush their dream by saying, well, you can't be a D1 or a D2 scholarship guy. Wherever you want to go to school, we'll build you a program. So just get a hold of us at ncwa.net. We'll help you do it.
You are listening to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast with my daddy, Jason Bryant.
Another episode of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast has come and almost completely gone. I'd like to thank you for listening, as always, and spending your time with me because, we'll get to that at the end of the show. Had a great weekend in Topeka. Saw Grandview set another record at the NAI National Wrestling Championships down in Topeka, Kansas. A big thanks go out to Bob Gonzalez, the entire local organizing committee, Mark Burchard, Alan Grossbach from the NAIA. Just really gave me a lot of basically everything I needed to help announce this thing with the great Dort Mayab. So Dort and I worked together announcing. This one had a great time. Grandview, they're joking around like it's the Grandview Invitational because they place all 12. Again, we've talked about how the NAIA has their structure with 12 multiple entries per weight class through the regional. Then you can get to the nationals. It's not like it used to be, but had an absolute blast. And I think wherever it is next year, I've got a hint, but that's not official yet. So we can't really drop it and tell you where it's going to be next year. But chances are that weekend's looking good for me, and I'll be back working hopefully again with Dort Mayab on the PA, and I just had an absolute blast. Again, that is a tournament that I started covering while I was at USA Wrestling 6 years ago, 2012. I doubled up. I went UNI. Actually, I went to the NAIs, which were in Des Moines that year, and then to the Western Wrestling Conference at UNI. And go figure that the UNI is now in a completely different conference with teams that are on the other side of the earth. They went from being in a conference with Utah Valley and Wyoming to one with Old Dominion and Buffalo. Go figure. But anyway, had just an absolute stellar time at the NAIA Championships. Great competition there. Just real impressive guys. And I just want to give a shout out to one of my, actually it's like one of these things that I don't really know the kid because I left Virginia before he started wrestling. But this kid, Chuck Sharon from Campbellsville, wrestled in the club that I grew up in, the PWA. He's from Smithfield High School, which is just on the other side of the James River from Newport News. If you're geographically trying to get a scope where this is, Smithfield Ham, folks, just think that. That's where it's from. Of course, that doesn't really help you in locating it, but Chuck Sharon didn't start wrestling until he was a junior in high school. And this kid never won a state title in Virginia. And then it was still 3 classes, so then it wasn't as watered down as it is now with this 6 publics and 1 private. I don't want to go down that. I don't want to get in the weeds on that, and I'll actually use that in the weeds versus what I was going to say here in a minute. But you got a kid that wrestled basically 2 years in high school, and now he's to the point where he's placing in the national finals. He was 8th last year. And just a kid that I've watched him develop as a wrestler while in college. And this is a place like if he gets this type of opportunity in a Division I room, I don't know if he develops as fast. I don't know if, he just gets chewed up and spit out because he was still learning. Now he's out there, and I'm not drawing attention in a negative manner to a guy like Michael Pixley, who was number 1 at his weight class coming out of high school, number 1 or 2, depending on which ranking you look at or which weight class. This guy was going to go to Illinois, was an elite guy, national championships all around the kid. And then Chuck Sharon, who was on nobody's radar, outplaces him, actually beat him this year, outplaces him at nationals. The only loss that he took during the tournament, he had 1 loss in the regionals, but the loss during the tournament was to Ben Stroh, who was a multiple-time qualifier at the Division I level at Wyoming and had an extra year and used it in his home state of Montana at Montana State Northern. So a big shout-out to Chuck Sharon, Frankie James at Campbellsville for developing talent. And, kids sometimes that really love the sport of wrestling, there is absolutely no shame. No, don't. You're not hiding out in Division II, Division III, the NAIA, just because, it gives you an opportunity to develop and find a passion as a sport. One thing I kind of use this quite a bit when I was talking about why I like covering Division II, Division III, and the NAIA. This is where the grassroots really is. This is where the trickle down comes, and then the growth from the bottom up. It's kind of cyclical because very rare is the occasion, and Pennsylvania has a lot of this, but very rare is the occasion, like in my home state of Virginia, do you have NCAA champions and All-Americans at the Division I level as your wrestling coach. Kevin Dresser, exception. Steve Martin, exception. Sean O'Day, exception. Those are 3 that were, All-Americans and national champions. Sean O'Day was national champion at Edinburgh. He was coaching like Patrick Henry High School. And you're not going to have that most places. Most of the time, you're going to have either a guy that was on the team, maybe a spot starter, maybe a starter. Those are rare. Where your guys are Division II, Division III, NAIA guys that have gone through and they're in teaching now, and they wrestled at that level and they want to give back because they enjoyed wrestling so much. So these are the levels where our coaches and our coaches and teachers are coming from. So this is why I care. Everybody that's wrestling for a national championship deserves the right to be covered for a national championship. So that's why I started covering it initially. And now that I've got the opportunity to announce the NAIA championships, it's tremendous action. You can say, if you want to say, oh, well, it's not as good at wrestling. Well, that's your prerogative. These guys are out there busting their butt because they love the sport of wrestling, and they did a tremendous job, and it was an extremely fun tournament. So just the crew there, just a tremendous job at Topeka. So shifting gears, I almost said the word rabbit hole, and I want to thank Aaron Q. Teacher, and this is the 4-star review left on iTunes. So if you like the show, rate, review. And he left a rating and review.
He didn't fall? Inconceivable. You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Yeah, it was like that, because here is the review. Titled Rabbit Hole. You keep using this phrase. I do not think it means what you think it means. And you know what, sir? As a fan of The Princess Bride, I can totally dig that. And absolutely correct. And I am absolutely thankful for that review, because Merriam-Webster tells us that the definition of rabbit hole is a bizarre or difficult state or situation, usually used in the phrase down the rabbit hole. So I have been using this term incorrectly. I need to probably say off in the weeds. You go in the weeds. That's where you're like, okay, you're off topic. You're doing, off in the weeds, that type of thing. I also want to thank Nom, that's NOM from the Matt.com message boards, pulled out a great point of constructive criticism regarding the show and how I conduct interviews. And let's be honest, folks, this is what I do for a living. However, it's been a jack of all trades, master of none for a long time. I do a lot of broadcasting, I do a lot of PA announcing, and I do a lot of podcasting, a lot of interviews. And I have this crutch. And you guys that have known me long enough and have heard me answer questions, you guys know this. And I'm thankful that this came up because this is something I have been working to correct for years. What is it? Well, I'm kind of doing it right now. When I ask a question, I got the question I want to ask, but so many times I often want to make sure that I get some type of answer and know that this is where I want to go with this, that I have to explain the question deeper, which I know for you as a listener can be frustrating. And trust me, folks, I have been working on rectifying. And this is not something that's a podcast thing. This is something that's been almost my entire career since I was asking questions when I was 17 years old as a student reporter. This is just something that I'm trying to gain the right response. I'm not trying to shift the discussion necessarily, but I'm trying to get the right answer to the question that I want answered, if that makes any sense. So I was like, what were you thinking with your lineup change? Because then I would go, here we go, off in the weeds about why I wanted the answer about why the lineup change at 184. I didn't want an answer about a lineup change with a new guy at 133. I should have just said why the lineup change at 184. That is what some of these questions I try to get to. So thank you for that constructive criticism. Trust me, folks, this is something I am always trying to work on. There's a certain thing that another fan said, one of my crutch phrases, things that I send to is obviously. Well, I say that a lot. I've tried not to say that nearly as much with this show because that was brought up. So if you've got any bit of constructive criticism, shoot me a line, jason@bryantwrestling.com. I'm always trying to make this show better. I'm always trying to get better. I'm far from perfect, and I'm always want to make this an enjoyable listening experience for you because if you get tired of me asking the same style of question and it's just, okay, JB, get to the freaking point. Yeah, I get it. And I want you to know I am working on it. So those two things. So I'm working on, let's get rid of rabbit hole unless somebody's tripping acid. And I don't think that's going to be happening. And it sure as heck's not going to be me. And, Matrix quotes. And then working on crutch phrases and succinct questions. That was, I believe, how the term was used. So that being said, that's all I've got for you today. I want to thank you for those of you who have already been buying the preview guide. There's a couple discount codes floating out there. Podcast is the one that's, if you're listening to this show, I want you to hit. If you're a subscriber to the mailing list and you haven't bought the show, use news. I'm just trying to track where these purchases are coming from. And March 14th, still on the goal. Going to probably get some content from Andy Hamilton at trackwrestling.com to supplement with it this year. So I'm stoked for that. That's all I got for now. It's going to be Division 3's coming up this weekend in La Crosse, then to St. Louis. So, like I said at the beginning of this, I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me because now I'm going to finish it. You've always got time for short time.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.